Welcome, everyone. I'm Sandra Bargman. A few years ago, I wrote and performed a solo show called The Edge of Every Day, which was an exploration of the rough edges and contradictions we all face and grapple with. The show hit a nerve, and the relevance of the topic would only grow over time more than I could have foreseen. So, here we are. Real talk with real people, sharing stories and perspectives that spark provocative invitations to leap out of what's safe, on the edge of every day. Thanks for listening.
Pressing down on you, no manners
Hello, everyone. We are live in the Hive. Thank you for joining me on this, the 7th episode of The Edge of Every Day, here on TalkRadio.NYC. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, and for those of you who don't know me yet, I encourage you to check out my bio on TalkRadio.NYC, or of course you can visit my website, sandrabargman.com, or you can tune in to any of my previous episodes. In a nutshell, it's a show about celebrating triumphs, pushing boundaries, and exploring rough edges. Through conversations and shared stories with friends and colleagues, it's my hope that we can begin to understand our edges. And what I mean by edges is those places where we're fearful, those places where we are resistant to change, those places where paradoxes and contradictions live in our beliefs and in our understandings, both internally and collectively in the world around us. We live in edgy, challenging times, but life isn't black or white. It's an embrace of both. And the more we recognize our own edges and get real about them, the more we can help others to do the same. And that, I fully believe, can help to change the world. So, thanks again for tuning in. And without further ado, it's time to introduce our guests this evening. Dan LaPray is passionate about music and has used that passion to nurture his creative spirit. He began writing songs when he was 18, and when he realized the power that music wields to seal in the emotional impact of a film experience, a career was born. Dan has produced and worked on projects for multiple billion-dollar corporations, including Microsoft, Office Max, HP, and Google. He also directed a nationally televised documentary for Donate Life America with multi-platinum recording artists Alex Band and Eve Six. In 2011, Dan founded Number 7 Entertainment, and in 2015, he produced Just Let Go, starring Emmy Award nominee Henry Ian Cusick and Academy Award nominee Brenda Vaccaro. He also produced the soundtrack album for the film, featuring various artists, including Elaine Bradley from Neon Trees and Ryan Innes from NBC's hit TV show, The Voice. Dan is currently working on several projects, including Absolution, a psychological thriller with a wonderful message regarding mental health awareness. Chris Williams was born and raised in Salt Lake City, Utah. After serving a mission to Paraguay for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and graduating from the University of Utah, he went to work as an IT architect and systems engineer. When his wife and 2 children were killed in a drunk driving accident in February 2007, Chris made the most important decision of his life. One that could, on that cold night, a devoted father of 4 and a 17-year-old drunk driver both received life sentences. But as Chris Williams sat in his demolished vehicle, staring at the car that had just caused the death of his wife, his unborn baby, his 9-year-old daughter, and his 11-year-old son, he committed to do something extraordinary. He would forgive. He is the best-selling author of Let It Go, a true story of tragedy and forgiveness that chronicles his journey toward healing that affected his family and friends, the young man who caused the accident, and an entire community. In 2015, his story inspired the making of the feature movie, Just Let Go. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome, welcome.
Hi, Good evening. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. So I like to start these out by quickly speaking about how I've met my guests. So I'm going to dive in with Dan. So I met Dan through a mutual friend and colleague who introduced us and said that she thought she had an intuition we would be good collaborators. So we greeted one another via email, set up a Zoom with your production partner, Jeff Arcio, and me and my husband. And we talked about your project, Absolution, in the film that you had written about mental health, particularly PTSD, and potentially our involvement as executive directors. And we'll talk about Absolution later in our evening tonight. But you also shared about the creation of Just Let Go and the incredible story of Chris Williams and how it was to work with him. And I was completely and utterly intrigued by that. And at the end of our Zoom meeting, I went downstairs and streamed it on Amazon. I was curious, obviously, about your filmmaking, but I was so deeply curious and intrigued about Chris's story and his healing journey to forgiveness. And I was blown away by the film. The filmmaking was magnificent. And the story, a haunting story, just leveled by the edge of grief, Chris. And the next night I asked my husband to watch it again with me. And of course, the same thing happened for him. And I reached out to Dan about being on this podcast, and he was kind enough to reach out to you to join us this evening. So again, I thank you both for joining me. And tonight I'm meeting Chris for the first time. So thanks again.
Absolutely.
So let's dive in to this extraordinary experience talking about the edge of grief. I don't know any larger edge that we humans face. The most profound and powerful and the most misunderstood teachings, spiritual teachings of any tradition around the world is all about forgiveness. So Chris, set the stage. What happened to you that cold night in February of 2007, please?
Sure. So at the time, I had my wife and 3 of my 4 children in a car. We had just gone out to eat with friends. My eldest son was at a basketball game at the local high school, so he wasn't with us. But the rest of us, after eating, had decided to go get a treat, just an ice cream cone. And so we were proceeding on a very well-traveled road that night. The basketball game had just got out, so there were a lot of cars on the road that night. And this particular part of the road is one that goes underneath a freeway. And so as you start to kind of descend below the freeway, your view is obstructed by the freeway itself. And then you get to a point where you can see the oncoming traffic. And at that point, I saw a pair of headlights just coming at our car at freeway speeds. In fact, afterwards, the police that investigated indicated that it absolutely was about 75 in a 35-mile-an-hour zone. There was nothing I could do to get out of the way because we were in an underpass with pillars on both the left and right side of our car and a lot of traffic on the road. There wasn't much I could do to avoid being hit, and we were T-boned or broadsided on the passenger side of the car as the oncoming car had actually swerved into our lane, into crossed the lane, and it was coming directly at us. And at the last minute, tried to correct to go back into the proper lane. And at that point, it was just too late. And so he struck our car at that horrific speed. The impact was just immediately devastating. I was awake and aware soon after the impact. I mean, the imploded front windscreen was still falling like glass to the ground. My foot was still jammed on the accelerator, but we weren't moving anywhere because the impact was so severe that the drivetrain, the big steel connecting element that to the front wheels had been completely sheared off because of the impact. And so the engine was revving, but there was no forward motion at all. It was just an absolute moment of shock, but also of immediate grief as I then, in a panic, started to try and desperately feel for a pulse on my wife. I could barely move my head because of the injuries I had sustained, but I was at least able to get my hand off of the stick shift and onto her hand as she was sitting next to me. And as I just desperately tried to grasp to feel for that pulse point, I couldn't feel anything at all. And I'd had previous medical training, so I knew where to look for that. But once again, not being able to feel a pulse in that situation, it was terrifying. And then, of course, I was able to finally get my head turned enough to see that she had sustained a significant injury to her elbow that was not bleeding. And that was a very, very bad sign. So in this moment of panic, as I'm trying to ascertain if she had made it or if my children had made it in the back seat, it was just an immediate onset of panic, of shock, of grief, of sadness, of disbelief. It was, I think surreal is an appropriate word to use there, but also soul crushing. It was just absolutely more than I could bear in that moment. Especially as I was finally able to look back in the backseat and see that my son had sustained an injury that was not bleeding, injury to the head, no less, that was not bleeding. And that was a very bad sign. And then my daughter, I couldn't see any injury on her, but her hair was just covering her face as she was leaning slightly forward, but no movement whatsoever. And later on, of course, I did learn that they had died instantly, that there was no amount of CPR, no amount of emergency medical help or assistance that would have allowed them to survive. I did have a 6-year-old son seated directly behind me, and he did survive the accident, but I couldn't see or hear anything from him during that time in the car. And so, the worst case for me in that was that all were dead. And it was just, as I mentioned, it was just absolutely more than I could bear. And so that's what took us to this moment of just intense grief, intense pain, and being presented with an unbelievably, unimaginably terrible experience.
Oh, indeed. And while you were in that car, you were screaming out, and what I've listened to in some of your interviews and in the film, there was something that you heard in that car.
Absolutely. So because of the grief, I mean, I wanted to die as well. I just did not want to, face life with this new reality. And there was a point where I did hear this soul-wrenching cry of grief, and it was, as I was trying to grieve, it was almost annoying that there was this other sound there, and I was trying to get it to stop, and it, I finally realized that I was the one making that sound. It was just coming from so deep within me, this sound of pain and anguish, that when I put that together, it was almost more than I could bear. But in the midst of that, I did look out through my window that had not been hit. We were hit on the passenger side, so the driver's side was okay. But I looked up the road, I could see the car that had struck us. It was on its roof, had been overturned, and it was about 50 to 80 feet up the road. And as I looked at that road in the midst of this grief, it occurred to me that this was going to be impacting them as much as, maybe as much as, but at least impacting them as it was me and my family. And as I started to kind of contemplate that thought, I heard, as if it was spoken over my shoulder, the words, "Let it go." And hearing that, it kind of stopped me in the middle of this intense grief and gave me a moment where I realized I had a decision to make. I had a decision that, was I going to try and move forward from this horrific experience by myself? Or could I let it go and trust that there was a better way to do this, to move forward? As a believer, as a Christian, it was really, as I look back on that moment, it was really as if I was being asked, did I have faith in Jesus Christ? As a Christian, that's who I was focusing and my hope on and my life on. And in that moment, it was as if I was being asked, okay, was that all real? All of those years prior of being a Christian, was it real? Could I in that moment, stay true to the belief I had espoused throughout my entire life? And that's what I decided to do, was to let it go and trust that there was a higher and nobler and more I don't know if merciful was kind of the word I was thinking of at that moment, probably not, but at least there was a better way to move forward than to try and do this myself. And by that meaning, trying to get for justice, trying to get vengeance, trying to, make sure that whoever did this pays, to the extent that I was suffering. That's what I wanted to let go of.
And that's a good point for us to stop and take a break. When we come back, we will speak with Chris about how that transformed in his family and how Dan came onto the project. When we're back, thank you.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on TalkRadio.NYC.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant. And on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on TalkRadio.NYC.
Are you on edge? Hey, we live in challenging, edgy times, so let's lean in. I'm Sandra Bargman, the host of The Edge of Every Day, which airs each Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on TalkRadio.NYC. Tune in live with me and my friends and colleagues as we share stories and perspectives about pushing boundaries and exploring our rough edges. That's The Edge of Every Day on Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on TalkRadio.NYC.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Chipping around, kick my brain to the ground. These are the days it never rained, but it pours on the edge of every day.
And we're back on The Edge of Every Day with Chris Williams and Dan LaPray. So, forgive me, this it feels like such a jarring jolt to move ahead after the sharing of all of that, but we only have an hour, and when I want 10 hours to talk all about this with you. So you heard this voice and you understood that you needed to set down the bitterness, set down the anger out of the gate. Would you have called it, I need to forgive, in that moment? That mystical experience of connecting to forgiveness, could you have called it that, articulated that in the moment?
Probably not in the moment, but I think it was my survival. I knew that if I was to keep going, which, I actually at one point put my head against the headrest and tried to will my spirit out of its body. I mean, it's just the crazy thoughts that go through right in that moment of pain.
Imagine.
But that was basically it, is that I knew in my weakness, my inability to prevent what had just happened, my inability to control the emotions I was feeling, I knew that if I didn't do something, that this could destroy me. Yeah. And it could destroy my two boys. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking immediately of them, but I just knew that there was a path forward, and that I was still here. I didn't perish. And that if I was to survive on that path and have any expectation of happiness, of moving forward from this, horrific experience, that I had to let it go. I couldn't carry the burden of anger or resentment at the same time as trying to heal. So, and I think for a lot of people, that is, viewed in that light, forgiveness is a lot more accessible. If it's about, letting something go so that you can have that expectation or hope of happiness moving forward, at least for me, it clarified what I needed to do and what I needed to let go of. And by letting go, it was whoever had hit us, whatever the circumstances behind that, I wasn't going to focus my energy on trying to right that.
Yes.
You know, if it was a man that had had a heart attack that he couldn't control his vehicle, I wasn't going to, get mad at him or whatever. Or if it was, as it turned out, a teenager drinking and driving, I wasn't going to focus my path forward on trying to, hurt this person or to make sure that they paid. In a sense, I was just going to focus on the things that I could control, which is me and dealing with my emotions of grief, etc., and then healing my boys.
And yes, exactly. And being with your boys and your family and your community, ultimately.
Yep.
So and we'll get to your boys. I have some questions around that, but in the context of the movie. So fast forward, you decide to write the book. Mm-hmm. And then how did the book move into becoming a movie project? Dan, how did, or Chris, dive in. How did this come together as a project for feature film?
Sure. Well, Dan, go ahead. You can.
Yeah,
well, that one.
There's another Chris that comes into the story. His name is Christopher Clark, and he had a grandmother that actually lived in the same area as Chris Williams did. And Chris and myself are filmmakers. Christopher, I'll call him, I guess, because
too many Chris's.
Chris 1 and Chris 2.
So Christopher is a filmmaker, and his grandmother's like, "Hey, I know you make these inspirational messages or whatever, and there's this man that I know, this happened to him, you may want to talk to him." Mm-hmm. And so Chris and Christopher were introduced. And from then, there was a short film made called "Forgiveness, My Burden is Made Light." And that was kind of put out kind of on YouTube, and it did quite well. It got 1 million+ views or whatever. And so from then it was like, well, Christopher and his lifelong friend named Patrick, it's Christopher and Patrick, they don't separate from each other. It's just Chris and Pat. So they had been doing the movie since they were little kids together. And they partnered on this little short film. And so they thought, well, could this be a feature? Could this be something that could really affect people? There seems to be a little audience for this. Can we make this into something bigger? But they hadn't really done anything bigger yet. Hadn't really worked with much of a larger crew and a first AD and that stuff. And so they reached out to me saying, look, we can't do. And when we'd been friends for a long time, we started a business earlier in our lives, a little production company that didn't go very far, but they reached out to me and said, we can't produce and direct this. So will you come on and produce this movie for us and give us the tools that we need to make this project into something bigger? And so that's kind of how it came to my door.
Cool. And you, of course, could not have not been completely and utterly attracted to the content of all of this. Now, you hadn't met Chris Williams yet?
At this point, I had not met Chris.
Okay.
Yeah, but they did know that he was going to be involved, and that it would be something that we had to do together. And we didn't have the funding for it at that point. It was like, well, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to make this happen? And we committed to each other at that time that this story was important enough that we would do whatever we needed to do to make it.
You would find that way. So, and we're going to talk about this too a little later too. I'm calling it a template. This template that you came up with involving 501c3s and charities and a variety of ways of getting financing and getting the story out there. But right at the moment, I'd like to continue focusing on Chris's story within the context of the movie. So one of the favorite parts of the film for me was the recurring theme of the box. And I would use and getting outside of the box and thinking outside the box. And in my lingo, and for the sake of the show, I would say the box is boundaries, and getting out of the box would be pushing the boundaries. And the jail, of course, is a box, but these mental boxes that we construct around revenge and anger and holding on to our bitterness, as you mentioned, Chris. But But forgiveness isn't a mental, logical process. It's a mystical process. And that's what you spoke about, Chris.
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, so for me, that box was very, very powerful because it allowed me to kind of compartmentalize what I was going to focus my energy on,
Yes,
and what I was going to let go of. And it's important, I thought, for me to do that because I wanted to acknowledge that I was angry. I wanted to acknowledge that the feelings I was experiencing were real.
real.
Because
Yes.
a lot of people would say, well, don't, just let it go and be happy. And it's like, no, I want to go through the grief. I want to, because these people meant something to me. So I want to cry. I want to feel that pain, but I want to do it in a way that's safe for me to move forward through it. So there's a lot of things that are not safe. So it's kind of like the Pandora thing. There's some things that are in a box for a reason. Don't open it, or else you can unleash all sorts of unwanted results. And so for me, that was that mental, opportunity to acknowledge the anger and acknowledge this person now that had done this to our family, had made these choices, but to put that person in a box like they were, like you said, a jail is a box. And we do this in society. We take people and we take them out of society. We put them where they won't hurt anymore. So I did this mentally. I put them in a box. I shut it, locked it, and then I moved forward. And for me, it was about not going back and opening that box up.
So the theme came from you. This was something that it was in your book, and something that Dan, you latched onto and wove throughout the script with the whole Houdini. I mean, even the Chinese food, the little boxes with thank you. I was like, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, we actually didn't even have that Houdini quote as the script was being written. We kind of figured out that after the fact. The key word that his mother had, and it's like, okay, that's
creepy perfect.
Yeah, so things just kind of worked out. And really, it's the script that well, I mean, the script is about the story, but the script is what really attracted the talent to this. We knew that we couldn't just have local actors portray this. We couldn't have part-time actors that were really pizza delivery drivers pull off a role like this. So we searched.
Yeah, you had the real deal.
We had to find somebody that was real. That was a real actor that did this every day. And so that was quite a search for us. And I think we found the right people.
Oh, yes, you did. I am just now getting 2 minutes to break. This is flying by. I have a million more questions. So when we come back, we will talk about Chris and how you dealt with your boys and what's happening with a young man. The 17-year-old, and what's happening with him today. When we come back on The Edge of Every Day, stay tuned.
I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Gateway to the Smokies. It airs on TalkRadio.NYC every Tuesday night from 6 p.m. to 7. Every episode is dedicated to memorable experiences in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and surrounding areas. This show features experts and locals who expound upon the richness of culture, history, and adventure that awaits you in the Smokies. Tune in every Tuesday from 6 p.m. to 7 on TalkRadio.NYC.
Are you passionate about the conversation around racism? Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. TLC, host of the Dismantle Racism Show, which airs every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on TalkRadio.NYC. Join me and my amazing guests as we discuss ways to uncover, dismantle, and eradicate racism. That's Thursdays at 11 o'clock a.m. on TalkRadio.NYC.
Are you a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sauver, employment law, business law attorney, and host of the new radio show, Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on TalkRadio.NYC.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Chipping around, kick my brain to the ground. These are the days
we are back with Chris Williams and Dan LaPray. And I'm going to jump in with another portion of the film that I thought was quite something in terms of understanding forgiveness for our listeners, to deeply dive into the forgiveness that you exhibited. Your young son, you have two sons that are, and you're struggling with them. Your younger son has had trauma and some physical issues, and your older son is angry and disgusted and infuriated with you. And your mother wants legal justice and retribution, wants you to choose those things. And I think about how forgiveness lives in our society, and lack thereof in our society, how sometimes compassion and forgiveness can be perceived as signs of weaknesses or with competing sides, and that it's like a sign of disloyalty, and that your family wanted you to not choose forgiveness. They wanted you to fight and be angry and to hold on to that. And I thought that was a very nuanced way of showing that in the film, Dan, and it was quite something. And so how did you, Chris, navigate that with your family and ultimately with your community?
No, and you're right. Forgiveness is a journey, but it's so individualized. And I think that was the first thing I had to just recognize, is that they didn't have that let it go moment. I had. And so they were coming to this experience in a much different way. I mean, the grief that they were feeling, the anger they were feeling, they hadn't yet had that moment of kind of, I won't say reconciliation, but the moment to choose how they were going to process that and move forward. And so a lot of it was still just raw emotion, and then reacting to that raw emotion. So I think the first thing I did is I gave them space to grieve and to develop and to grow in their own journey of forgiveness. And that was, I think, it saved me, because I think had I tried to force them to let it go as well, or had I tried to force them through some path of, the stages of grief or the stages of whatever, that I think it would have been a huge failure. And I think it would have really stolen from them an opportunity to grow themselves. So I think I focused on unconditional love and patience, giving them time and space and an example, meaning my example, to allow them to work this out and to move forward from it. It took time, but I'm happy to report that all three of them absolutely came to the same point of not only forgiveness, but the same point of healing in a positive and a constructive way to move forward in their lives. So they've all done remarkably well with that. It took time, so I'm so grateful for patience. and it was certainly trying at times, especially with my boys, but just staying there with unconditional love and then giving them that space and time to grow was the absolute best answer.
Oh, heartfelt congratulations on that. Oh, my goodness. So the young man who hit you, the 17-year-old, Curtis White, what is he? Talk to me about him. You got a phone call from his counselor while he was in juvenile detention, about 2 years after.
Correct.
And you went in and met him, and how did that go? And then I want to talk to Dan about shooting that scene.
Sure. Yeah. So it was very interesting that he had prepared. They were trying to help him with empathy. And so they had asked him to prepare some questions so that he could come to understand and know my wife and my children and the impact that his decision that night had made on our family. And of course, I answered those questions as openly and honestly as I could. And at the end, they asked him, is there anything else you want to ask Mr. Williams? And he just folded up his paper and he just got close to me and just said, is there, after everything I did to your family, how can you forgive me? And I think that was the one question he desperately wanted to answer above all the others. And so I told him that it was, based on my faith, and that I believe it was a higher power. It was through Jesus Christ that I was able to, get that grace, so to speak, that enabling power to do this. But that experience opened up an opportunity to to see him, not as the 17-year-old that made that horrific decision that night, but to see him as a new person, the opportunity to become a new person. So as I think back to that box metaphor, it's almost like I could put that 17-year-old person, that selfish young man that was making horrible decisions, I could kind of put him in the box, close it, and that this new interaction with this new person I was talking to could be just that, a new opportunity to meet this person as he really is, as he could become. In 2012, he was married. It was my honor to go to his wedding, and it was really kind of a culmination of that experience of seeing him as a new person and starting to disassociate who he was becoming with the person he was 17 years ago. And I think that's a gift that boy is so needed in society. You know, the gift of allowing people to reinvent themselves, to become something new, to let go of whatever, to evolve, and to love them for who they're becoming, and not constantly bring the past and judge them by their past actions. And so Cameron has since, as I said, married in 2012, and that he's had 2 children, and we've stayed in touch. And so as I see the good that has come out of this in his life, it has helped me to see that good has come out of a tragedy and tragic experience. In a small way, it makes it not as tragic. And so that's, I think, why I've done the film and the book and everything else, is the more good that can come out of a horrific experience, then the less horrific it is.
Truly. So, how involved with a movie making were you? And I want to talk to Dan about the filming of the scene at the prison, at the detention facility. And I remember, Dan, you sharing with me this moment when they were meeting and were they going to touch. And I'll tell you what, the filmmaking of Chris, it was amazing display of what choosing forgiveness was about. You could see all in Henry Ian's performance, all of Chris's, you have devastated me. This forgiveness is a choice for me and for you to move forward, about not holding, as you just mentioned, Chris, not holding on to the past. But there was no sugarcoating it, and this is your opportunity. You leveled me, you ruined my life, and it was very straightforward, but so beautifully open and encouraging at the same time. It was extraordinary. So how was it, Dan, to film that? And then I'll get to Chris about how it was to be involved.
Well, Chris was on set pretty much every day. We loved having him there because we needed to
of course you did,
his spirit and to make sure that we were doing it right. But that scene in particular, you know, we set it up, and you haven't seen Cameron, his name, Curtis, you haven't seen his face yet in the movie. We did that on purpose.
Yes.
He was always obstructed. It was just this character. We didn't know what he looked like, and we finally see him in this
set of chains
in this moment, right? And in the script, it just called for them to do their little reconciliation, and so there was no anything else. And when Ian did it, and then they separated, for me, it just didn't feel right. I still haven't asked Chris if this is true. Like, did he actually touch him? Because when he didn't touch, I just went up to the director and I was like, something's not right. He's saying he's forgiving him, but unless he's willing to touch skin to skin,
to watch the struggle to move into that.
Yeah, I'm not believing it. And they're like, okay, let me go talk to Ian and see what he thinks, you know? So the director went and talked to Ian and was like, whatever. And then the next thing you know, reaches out his hand and touches him. And for me, it just all of a sudden, all the senses just came together. And it's that moment where when you're willing to actually embrace someone or touch someone or shake their hand, now you're not just saying you forgive them, you're actually proving that you did it. So I don't know if Chris really did. Well, that's a good question right now. Did you give him a hug? Did you touch him? Did you just walk away in that moment? I don't know.
No, so there was a hug, actually. It was tense. You know, when I first came into the room to meet him, he had been there for some time already. And so he'd been lifting weights. He was definitely bulked out, and he had a very defensive posture. I think he was expecting me to just come at him and start to just try and land a fist or something. And I wouldn't blame him for that caution, right? I mean, you see this in courtrooms, not everyone gets really angry. But no, I came in with, I think, such a demeanor that of really being there to try and help him, that it was really offsetting. And I think that's why he was able to ask that final question. And I think that's why he was open to the hug. It wasn't a close hug, though. I think the handshake absolutely kind of captured the essence of what had happened between us. It didn't need to be a hug. That was just this. But to your point, though, that I think that to the film, it absolutely makes that scene when there's that contact.
Yeah, closure. So I watched the show again, the film again last night in preparation for this, and I had already seen last night right before when I knew you could come on, I had watched some interviews with you, so I knew what you looked like. And when we were in the last scene, and your character in speaking as you in church to the congregation, and the camera pans out to the congregants, and there you are sitting in the front, and I was like, oh my, that's so fabulous. And it struck me, what was it like in that moment and I'm sure the entire time you were filming, well, maybe not the entire time, but it moments throughout. How was it to watch your life story being told like this and being played out by someone else that you were watching? And what insights potentially did you have, or some unexpected emotional evolutions in that whole process?
Before he answers, I want to. So that's not the moment that's important. We recreated this accident to a T.
Oh, totally.
It was wild. And the people of Mill Creek, on that night, that we had blocked off the road, the cars were there upside down again, and the community was freaking out. They're like, it happened again? They couldn't believe it. They were so like, we can't believe this is happening again. They were so freaked out.
Oh, I'm sure.
As we're filming that scene, I look over and there's Chris. I'm like, what are you doing here? I'm like,
so he saw that. Wow.
That. And he's like, my mom made me come. So,
yeah. Well, very quickly. So, and you mentioned I wasn't on set quite a bit. I now selfishly a little bit, I use this as an opportunity for my boys to heal. I thought it was important for them to to go through what I had done, because they were still struggling significantly when this was all being done. And so, I don't know that I wanted to be there as much as I was. I kind of felt like I was a little more, where I probably shouldn't be. I just wanted to let them kind of go and do this thing and make this the movie. But when I saw this as an opportunity to just have my boys kind of experience what I had to help them on their road of forgiveness, it was a bit of a selfish kind of a hanger-oner on the sets. And so I kind of felt like I was a little bit like I shouldn't be there, but at the same time, I felt it was very, very helpful for my boys to relieve that. So in that congregation scene, they were there as well, both of my boys. And for them to hear that, I think was exceptionally helpful.
Oh, spectacular. And we're going to take a break on that. And when we come back, we're going to hear about this template that I've mentioned and some of the things that Dan brought in as producer to make this thing happen. And we're also going to talk about absolution when we come back. Thank you.
Every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern for the Mind Behind Leadership, where we focus on what leadership really means to us and to others. We have practical discussions with the CEOs of some of the world's largest companies, owners of small businesses, and experts in psychology and behavior to get that inside track, what to do, what to avoid, and what really happens. Join me, Graham Dobbin, at the new time, 4 p.m. every Tuesday for the Mind Behind Leadership, here live on TalkRadio.NYC.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on TalkRadio.NYC, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on TalkRadio.NYC. Calling all pet lovers.
Pet Avengers, assemble! On the Professionals and Animal Lovers show, we believe the bond between animal lovers is incredibly strong. It mirrors that bond between pets and their owners. Through this program, we come together to learn, educate, and advocate.
Join us live every Wednesday at 2 p.m. at TalkRadio.NYC.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Chipping around, kick my brain to the ground. These are the days it never rained, but it pours on the edge of every day.
And we are back with Dan LaPray and Chris Williams. Dan, I'd like to dive in with you and talk about, because this is helpful in terms of speaking about absolution, what were some of the elements that you brought in and organizations that you brought in to make this happen, to produce this film, and to create a type of template that really supported the making of the film, the getting it out into the world educationally, etc. Tell us about that.
So with our distributor, we ended up trying to do something a little differently. And instead of releasing this just locally or trying to go big with a big, huge, wide release, we ended up partnering with Fathom Events. And the reason we did that is because we kind of got connected to Delilah from Delilah, you know, the radio queen. And she had an audience and she decided to promote the film and really loved the film. And so we kind of brought her on as a host, so to speak. And then I reached out to Archbishop Desmond Tutu's Forgiveness Challenge charity and asked if it might be something that they'd be interested in. And so they responded immediately, and Archbishop Tutu had a recurrence of cancer at that time, so he wasn't really able to be involved, but his daughter, Empa, did a video for us as part of that night, and they created a special forgiveness challenge for us that they left with the people that came to the premiere. So this was a one-night only premiere event that went across the nation in over 400 theaters. And so we also brought in Fred Luskin, who is a physiological expert on forgiveness from Stanford University, to talk about what it means in a non-religious sense to either forgive or to bottle up in a box and hold on to something inside of you. And a couple others on the panel, just to kind of really talk about forgiveness and what it meant, because we knew that it wasn't even forgiveness is not something that even Christians have a corner on the marketplace on.
Oh, of course not, yeah. It's spoken about in all religions.
Yes, it's important in a lot of people's
lives.
Well,
and secularly too.
Correct. Yeah, just maybe not as much secular, but we wanted to bring in that perspective because of those that maybe not religious that might still be struggling with something. We felt like if people could watch this movie and realize what a unique individual Chris Williams was and what he was able to do and what he was able to let go, maybe that night 30 years ago when two brothers got in an argument and haven't talked since because somebody called them a name or whatever, would realize that, whoa, maybe I should take a look at myself and figure out if I can reconnect with my brother or my parents or whoever it might be that they haven't talked to in a long time. And so
Indeed.
we wanted to reach those kinds of people and see if this film could impact them in a way that might help them to reconnect again with somebody and to maybe finally let something go that they hadn't been able to do in the past.
So what happened after that premiere? Did the film have any more showings in theaters, or was it it was glorious 400 theaters, fantastic. Did it have another life in theaters, or did it go directly online?
We did release it. We were planning on doing a smaller release after, but because this was something new that we hadn't tried before, we weren't quite aware of what it took to do that.
Got it. So
a lot of marketing had been done to actually point towards that night. You can watch it on this night only. And so then when we released, what we should have done is waited a little bit more time But we tried to then release it in our area specifically quite soon after that. But people were confused. Like, wait, I thought this was one night only
But
thing.
like it had happened already. Well,
Yeah.
it's good learning for how you're going to structure potentially absolution, and this is a great seg to move into talking about that. Tell us about absolution, the film itself, and what you're hoping to pull together. in
We were
getting
actually
it
supposed
created.
to shoot Absolution like right after Just Let Go. And for whatever reason, it didn't happen. We weren't able to raise the funding for both projects. So we went and did Just Let Go, and then Absolution has sat on my desk for years. And then it really wasn't about mental health when we wrote it. It was about a mysterious guy and this kind of psychological thriller. But then from this pandemic and everything that's been happening with people's mental health and being cooped up and not able to work, or working when other people can't work next to you, all of a sudden I was like, wait a second, this film has got new life. This might really be able to help people come to terms with mental illness. And I think it's just getting more rampant in our
People are more willing to talk about it than talk about the spectrum of issues.
But we're still not. We think we are, but I don't know that we're really there yet. So I've done a series of documentaries on mental illness and talked to people with schizophrenia and all kinds of problems. And yeah, it has opened up more, but I still think that a lot of people have closed windows and closed doors to their soul that won't admit that they are struggling.
Like forgiveness. I want to live in the past. I don't want to get real with what I'm feeling and all of my fears. That's what it is. Just getting real with those fears.
Yeah.
So you feel, of course, that this film Absolution will shine a greater light on that issue, that health issue in general.
The plan is to get some charities involved, and so we're still looking for the right partner, the right mental health or mental illness awareness institution that we could help benefit. Because the goal for the film, just like with Just Let Go, was to like help people forgive and to help people find the ability to do that. We created that with the Forgiveness Challenge. So with Absolution, we're hoping that we can find the right mental health institution to partner with. That's a 501c3, that we can actually use the film as education and to help people realize that there are people in our lives that we know that we should be checking in with. And they might be living in some dark corner, and we need to be able to recognize that and maybe help them to come out of that, and maybe realize that we can be instruments to help people to not commit suicide and to come to terms.
I'm seeing the word NAMI, N-A-M-I. So is that an acronym that you know?
That's the National Alliance of Mental Illness, I think is what it's called. It's
Okay, that makes sense.
A very large charity. We still need to reach out to them. So yeah, we're trying to figure out.
Well, and I've been just newly connected with some that you and I can talk about, but we can put this out there in the world right now for people who are listening in. If you know of charities, 501c3s that deal with health issues, reach out to me, send them to me at TalkRadio.NYC. And I will make sure that Dan receives any of that information so he can pursue it.
Main character is also a veteran, so I'm meeting with the group called Warrior Rising actually coming this week, because the veterans, 22 veterans, are killing themselves every day. It is
yes, indeed. So let's hear about the story just quickly, a recap of the story of Absolution, if you know what you can share.
Yeah, so Alex is a recluse. He works at night. He doesn't get to associate with anybody, and he just goes to work when everybody else is sleeping, and when everyone else is awake, he goes to sleep, and he starts feeling like he's losing touch with reality. And then dead people start showing up in his apartment, and he of course has nothing to do with it, and he's trying to figure out what's going on. He's being framed. He's then having these hallucinations, and he's talking with the psychiatrist the whole time. And so our journey is watching him interact with the psychiatrist and then seeing his life play out in front of us and trying to determine what's real and what's not real, and his struggle with, he just wants to take his own life, but now he's like, I want to interact with society, but someone's trying to frame me for these things that I'm not doing. Like, I want to I don't know what that was, but did we get taken to break?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I think that there was some background noise coming from somewhere.
Echo. But anyway.
Anyway, yeah, it's the trailer. You'll be able to see the trailer. For those of you listening in, we're going to post the trailer for the movie in the recap of tonight's show. They can go to TalkRadio.NYC and see the trailer. Also a link to your website all about Absolution will be in the recap as well. And this will be a good time to bring our show to a close. In addition to those links, you'll be able to go to order Let It Go, the book that Chris has painstakingly and gloriously put out into the world, that has inspired this project, filled with wisdom and insight. Thank you so much, Chris. You can get that at hopefully your local bookstore. You can order it, but you can also go online and order it there too if that's easier. Gentlemen, is there anything else you want to share with our audience before we say goodnight?
Hopefully we post a link to the film also. I dare you to watch it.
Absolutely. That will also be a part of it. I dare you to watch it. It's on Amazon Prime. It's streaming right now.
So thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been a joy.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you both. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Chris. It has been an honor and a pleasure to have you on talking about this. Just so grateful for you being here tonight. And for those of you listening in, you can check out TalkRadio.NYC/The Edge of Every Day and get the update on the show. And we will see you next week, Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thanks again for tuning in. Until then, take good care. Remember, we are always on the edge of the miraculous.
This is our last dance. This is our last dance. This is ourselves under pressure. Under pressure.